Good morning, supervisors. Ben Rosenfield. As you know, I'm an advisor that's been brought on by the county to assist it as it develops a financial roadmap going forward. Steps that the county should undertake to improve its financial management and clear audit findings in recent state audits. Today, I'll be walking through 4 parts of that project, 4 focus areas. I'll be touching on financial operations and systems, property tax collections, revenue and core financial policies, and lastly, financial forecasting and reporting. These are 4 key areas highlighted in state audits where I've been spending my time with the executive management team in the county. In each of those cases, I'll briefly highlight what the challenge is, some thoughts on recommended actionable next steps, and in each case there is a set of timelines and more definitive action steps. They're summarized at the end of the presentation. I won't walk them today, but know that they are there. Next slide. So I'll start with financial operations and systems, and I know that this board is well aware of the issues here. These were reported in state audits. But the underlying county core financial operational processes are substantially substandard. The root of these challenges are in large part to a long ago and incomplete implementation of the financial system that the county uses to perform the vast majority of this work. These deficiencies have been well documented in the past. This board heard a report from RGS in 2025. I think that it did a strong job of summarizing a lot of those challenges. And again, I want to kind of point to the past, a distant past, where I think the root of a lot of these are, which is just fundamentally the county is using a financial system that's in place in many counties across the state of California, but it's not fully utilizing that system. And it's not fully utilizing that system because many years ago it was not implemented to allow it to be usable. This results, therefore, in a whole host of financial activities that require extensive staff time to navigate what should be more routine transactions, things like processing journal entries, preparing a budget, preparing financial tracking reports, and in other cases leaves gaps that makes it very challenging even for the county to perform some of these tasks, things like bank reconciliation and others. In working through what next, I think it's clear that given the current misconfiguration of the financial system, the long time since it was last upgraded, the institutionalization of inefficient offline processes over time to work around to make things work without the benefit of that system, I think it's pretty clear that the path forward here is a re-implementation of the financial system, rather than a set of incremental changes over time and modest improvements. This is a major project, but I believe it would have the potential for major operating and efficiency benefits for all county operations going forward. Some high-level stats here on kind of what I believe should be expected. This is likely a 3-year project to get from beginning to end of. It will take resources. An estimate of approximately $3 to $5 million over that project span. It will take staff time, dedicated staff. I've recommended a staff of 3 to 5 staff focused on this project, along with consultant assistance that will be needed from outside to make it work effectively, and then probably most importantly, effective governance. A steering committee sitting on top of this project. It does touch many county functions and many departments, and it's important to have participation from many of those and regular reports to this board. I thought I would talk very briefly here about what year 1 of this multi-year project likely looks like. So this is a summary of that. I would imagine year 1 of this project being one of designing the way we want the world to look and the way we want our operations and procedures to look, and then years 2 and 3 are then implementing that system. We don't want to too quickly jump to simply implementing the financial system without asking ourselves first, what do we want it to do for us? and what do we want those processes to look like. That's a mistake that often happens, and the result is that you end up with financial systems that embed the way you're doing things today. And I think the goal here is to imagine that we can do things in a more standard way that's in place in many other places. So this year one of this process is predominantly one of documenting both the way each of these individual processes works today and then how we want it to work in the future. It will be important to staff up the project in year one, and I don't imagine this is a massive team required to do this, but I do think it's important to have dedicated resources. It's likely an in-house project manager with 2 to 4 other support staff, and there will be the need, as there always is on these sorts of projects, for expert external financial or consulting support. That's really predominantly going to be IT system implementation support, likely from the provider. And it's going to be business process design support, people that have experienced what these processes look like elsewhere. Slide. There are going to be a number of key questions to resolve during the first year of this project, and the questions, these aren't known today. These are the questions we want to, some of the questions I think we want to answer as a county during that year. Fundamentally, we want to decide, likely relatively early on, whether we want to re-implement MCBOS, the system that we're using today, or consider another financial system. That has dramatic impacts on timeline and approach here. The county should kind of work through this process and assess it and come to its conclusion. I will say my instinct today would be that this is likely a re-implementation of the Tyler MCBOS system that will come with less cost, less risk, and it is a system that is both known to the county and successfully being used in many of our neighbors. So it's a well-regarded system. We will have to answer questions about whether we want to have subsystems interfacing into the system for any of the specialized work that it might do. We have a whole host of choices to make about how ambitious we want the project to be in terms of how many business processes we're trying to rebuild, how we want to phase the modules as we get into implementation. And then importantly, and I think this is going to be a tension that's going to be felt throughout, we have challenges in our processes today. How much time do we want to spend rebuilding those processes only to then replace them when we re-implement this system? And so at what point do we want to kind of freeze development of new procedures, knowing that they will be ultimately redesigned in the project? I think this is a tension you always feel in these kind of projects. And there's a whole set of choices there that steering committee will have to wade through as we work through it. I do think a key deliverable at the end of the first phase of the project is a detailed work plan that should come forward to this board. And at that point, this board should I would suggest, will want to have either quarterly or semi-annual updates on how the project's going. There's a more detailed kind of set of timelines and tasks in the appendix here and offline, but at a high visual level, I think this is what this project looks like. These are calendar years. The remainder of this calendar year is largely likely prepping for the project. I think it's important to note that obviously this is a major effort, and each of the offices that's going to be involved here has a lot of existing work they have to continue to do to keep the lights on. You have an auditor controller that will need to close the books and issue an ACFR. You're going to be going through transitions in the CEO's office. You will have 2 new offices created from one. So there's going to be a lot going on in the background here. So I think the first 6 months is largely prep. It's visiting other neighbors that are using Tyler MCBOS differently, getting procurement processes underway to bring on consultant supports, and then seating the steering committee. And so that come 2027, you're really ready to have a focused effort on redesigning processes, and then the years after that, re-implementing the system. Turning to property tax, the second major area that we have been spending time on. Again, kind of a brief synopsis of the problem, and this board's well aware of it, and it's documented in state audits. I'll start here by saying that the California State Auditor recommendation, the first of their recommendations related to property tax, was that the county needed to have tools available to even understand the work in front of it and how to approach it. And there's the so-called aging reports that the auditor referenced, and that the team in both the assessor's office and IT have been working on. The good news is that first step has now been partially completed. There are aging reports available in the office that give us a sense of what's in the backlog, which is going to tremendously help the assessor's office as they now begin to kind of chart the work ahead. So that's the good news. The bad news is it gives us clarity into kind of the size of that backlog, and it is significant. We have over 5,000 property ownership or improvement events pending in the system that need to be processed. The next slide is a high-level summary of those, focusing on these two different property event types. So the left are here change in ownership events that are pending work and pending completion, and the right side are new construction events, permits that have been pulled in the county that need assessment work. You can see we have approximately 2,600 change in ownerships pending in the system, many stretching back many years, and similarly with permits, we have almost 3,000 permits pending, again, many stretching back many years. As this board's aware, there's a 4-year statute of limitations on collection of prior year assessment events. So that's a kind of a line that's drawn here. And you can see that we now have over 1,300 events that are past that statute of limitations. I want to stress, though, that is for backwards bills. And ultimately, the assessor's office will need to, legally and financially, will want to work through all of this, because adjusting assessments from even long ago will have an ongoing benefit looking ahead. And that's the predominant financial benefit here, I believe, for the county, the cities, and others that rely on this revenue source, is not so much the prior year tax bills as the base building effect that kind of getting caught up here will have. I won't dwell here on the impact of what a backlog like this, the challenges it creates, but it really creates it creates three primary ones. One, of course, is reduced revenue available for local services. And of course, it's important to note here the property tax isn't only the single largest single source for county operations, but a portion of property tax flows to the 4 incorporated cities, school districts, and other special districts in the county. So this is an important source for all of our governments here in Mendocino. Secondly, the backlog drives a massive amount of staff effort that otherwise wouldn't be if we were current. The process for all three primary offices and primary functions, and here I'm speaking to the assessor's function, the auditor controller function, and the treasurer tax collector function. If we are current on these activities going forward, they're more efficient to perform. When we start reaching in and having to issue tax bills for prior years, negotiate payment plans, deal with prior year events, it creates more work for the team, and therefore drives you further behind. And then lastly, of course, the backlog has significant creates significant important problems for property taxpayers. It creates uncertainty for them regarding when they will receive prior year bills, and it can lead to unfortunate surprises when the county does finally catch up. At a high level, this would be my assessment of kind of the organizational dynamics in play in the assessor's office, and I do believe they're kind of caught in a negative workload cycle. They've had a huge amount of staff turnover and change, and I'll talk about that briefly in a minute. That means they've lost institutional knowledge necessary to do work. It means they're pulling people off of the floor to train a never-ending chain of new people coming in the door. They understandably, faced with a backlog of work, they're using shortcuts to kind of get things processed quickly, but in doing that, it creates a negative loop where rework is going to be needed later then. There's an understandable focus on the short-term needs of the backlog, which is distracting from long-term improvements needed to the system and processes to kind of be more efficient with it going forward. And kind of and I've been here myself, kind of running functions like this. The more urgent today's problems get, the more distracting it gets from being able to plan for the longer term. And I think kind of interrupting this cycle is really what we're after here, looking ahead. think there's three key steps to stabilizing things and catching up on the backlog. The first is to stabilize staffing levels in the office. I'll talk about that in a second. The second is to develop a clear and measurable and public plan to clear the backlog and bringing back to this board and the public kind of a quarterly milestones to bring this, to kind of work this effort down. And I will say, and I'll touch on this later, that will require resources. I know this is an independently elected office, obviously, that operates operationally independently from this board. The board, though, has a critically important role, kind of engage with the assessor's office and others regarding staffing and workload. And in this case, I do believe additional resources will be needed when the assessor comes forward with a plan to kind of work it. Lastly, I will say while we are stabilizing staffing and working on the backlog, it's important that the department, that the office, continue to dedicate a small amount of resource and staff effort to make long-term improvements that fundamentally will avoid the backlog recurring. So I'll briefly run through each of these. There has been a remarkable amount of turnover and change in the assessor's office over the last 5 years. This slide summarizes some of that change. This is an office that currently has 19 staff, just for order of magnitude scale. During that almost 5-year period, they lost 24 people and brought on 23 new ones. So almost more than a complete turnover of the staff during that 4.5-year period. If you look at that on average, it means that every year for the last 4.5 years, the office has been losing a quarter of their staff and onboarding a quarter of their staff. Just a huge amount of churn and change that can obviously would destabilize any office's operations. We've had a number of conversations about what the likely drivers of this are, and while we don't have perfect information, management reports that it's likely a mix of a number of things: workload pressures, challenges with the new property tax system, potential lack of competitive compensation in certain areas, lack of dedicated staff time focused on training and development, and other challenges. So we know what the problem is here. We don't quite yet know what the solution is. And the recommendation here is really the assessor working with the CEO and the human resource director engage intensively to understand what the drivers of this turnover is and steps needed to intervene and stabilize office. There are tools that are understood by all the offices here to help have exit surveys. We know how to benchmark staff compensation to determine whether compensation is an issue. The CEO's office can work with the office to revise hiring procedures, onboarding procedures, and others. So here, I think it's critically important that these three offices work together to kind of assess the problem and then to figure out kind of the next steps. Turning briefly to a plan to develop, to eliminate the backlog. I'll start here at a high level just by, again, stressing how significant this backlog is. We're changing ownership events and permitting events. To give you a sense of scale, about 2,500 of these events were processed in 2020. So that's about kind of what our normal coming in the door activity looks like. And we're trying to clear 5,000 prior year events. So we need to, if we imagine this is a conveyor belt, we need to increase the speed of the conveyor belt. We need to double it in order to kind of work this backlog down in a 2-year period. So it will be a lot of work and it will take time. It will require stabilized staffing levels, times, almost certainly additional interim staff, and careful coordination with other offices that are obviously impacted by the backlog as well. So this is not just an assessor's office problem. This is an auditor controller and treasurer tax collector coordinated assignment. That plan, which we've recommended should come forward at the end of the first quarter of the coming fiscal year, should include detail, workload-driven metrics that give us a sense of how that backlog is going to change each quarter until it's eliminated. The plan should include careful work with the other participating departments that are necessary for the work to happen, and consider not just workload impacts in the assessor's function, but in these as well. And again, I think it's important that there be clear public expectations for how this work is going to be performed, clear expectations for this board regarding kind of what the pace looks like, and I've suggested there should be quarterly reports that come forward to the board, show how we're doing against that plan once it's been adopted. So while we are focusing on the shorter term challenge, which is the backlog, as I indicated earlier, it's important that the office retain dedicated hands and energy focused on improving the efficiency of the system that we are using. And I think there is a number of opportunities here to do so. The property taxes, I will say, unlike Tyler Munis, which is in use in many counties all over the state and being used effectively, Aumentum, the system that the county shifted to during the pandemic, is a challenging system, and it's a challenging system everywhere. It's not just Mendocino that's struggling with it. There's a number of counties that are using Aumentum, and it is very much a work in progress. But the system does have functionality that's only being partially used right now because the data in the system in some instances is either incomplete or wrong. And so there's an organized effort here to kind of populate missing data fields, clean up incorrect data. And once that's complete, once these characteristics are built in the system, it has the ability to partially automate functions that today are very manual. And so while we're focused on clearing the backlog, it's important to retain adequate staff time focusing on getting this repopulation and data cleaning so we can prevent the backlog from recurring in the future. Briefly here, and the assessor can speak to this more directly, but there is a shorter term resource need here. I don't believe it's significant. I believe it's likely 1 or 2 limited term staff for a period of time to just focus exclusively on this data cleanup work. Turning briefly to financial forecasting, reporting, and policies, and I know we presented on financial policies at a previous board meeting, and this board adopted a revised financial reserve policy. But here, obviously, charting a financial path forward for any government requires it to be able to accurately forecast its revenues, create budgets that respond to the trends you see in those forecasts, and then allow a mechanism whereby the CEO and the board can kind of track trend over time to adjust course as you need it. A budget is nothing more than a plan, and it needs to be managed as such. I did spend time kind of reviewing a number of different components of how the city, or how the county forecasts its revenue, prepares its budget, reports to the board and the public and others. And some of my observations are on the next slide. And I will say, in this case, I believe the county's taken a lot of positive steps over the last 18 months on this front. Like, I think the quality of the quarterly reports is much stronger than early versions of it that I've seen. I think it's very promising that the county is taking steps to stretch its forecasting beyond the 12 months of the budget into future fiscal years. And I generally find, actually, that the county's budget, the accuracy of the county's budget forecasting is actually good compared to many peers. And I can kind of talk about those things. But I do think there are important next steps here, and I can kind of talk about those. Briefly on budget forecast accuracy, I mean, obviously this is a critically important question. We want budgets to be realistic expectations of what we expect to occur. We know that actuals will always vary from budgets. The norms I've seen in other local governments in California usually have a goal of being within 2 to 5%. You want your actual revenues to be between 2 and 5%, depending on the place within your budgets. Mendocino in recent period has done well here. Like, if we look at the variances over the last 4 years, there's less than a 1% variance between the original budget forecasts and the final actual results. And on the right, you can see a comparison for the 23-24 ACFR of how Mendocino's accuracy compared to some of our peers. So I believe we're doing a reasonable job in terms of the accuracy of our budget forecasting. Where I think more attention should be spent and has been spent, as I mentioned, is in the reporting about how we're trending against that adopted budget as we go through the year. And these are the quarterly reports that come forward to this board and the public. A lot of these practices for these reports are in line with what you'd expect to see in other counties. I think they, though, can do a better job, to the last bullet point here, of summarizing the big picture, of using the quarterly reports to preview what we expect year-end results to be, and providing as a way of minimizing surprises. We will always have variances if we're being straightforward and in executive summaries highlighting where we expect to be at the end of the year. We can kind of preview those surprises so that they're known as you're building the subsequent year. A lot of the changes here I've recommended on this slide, or some of them have been implemented in Q2 and Q3 reports, as I mentioned, and others are predominantly a function of continuing to build out the executive summary of this report, I believe. I think at a big picture level, any government spends a lot of time developing its annual budget. It tends to be the focus. These quarterly reports should be seen as an opportunity to check in on how that budget is doing. And I think there's opportunities here to use the executive summary to see more forest and less trees in these reports. Turning briefly to long-range financial forecasting, obviously this board's aware of the importance of this work. While we adopt a 12-month budget, this board and the CEO and others are grappling with issues that stretch well beyond 12 months, things like multi-year labor contracts, infrastructure and deferred capital needs that will take often years to implement a given project, and others. So it's important to have our 12-month spending plans anchored in what we think the longer term looks like. Next slide. As I mentioned, I believe the county's taken important steps forward here in the last year. The quote-unquote and one projection that accompanied last year's budget was an important effort to kind of preview the second year, get a sense of what you think the longer-term trend looked like. And I think the preliminary 5-year estimates that have presented to this board as part of this year's budget development process are absolutely steps in the right direction. The suggestions here, though, are that we can kind of mature those changes and we can formalize them now. That the board should adopt a formal financial policy requiring a multi-year forecast to be produced each year, and on a calendar that would coincide with the beginning of the budget calendar, and that the quality and content of those projections continue to be refined. More nuanced projections and included in a public report that allows kind of transparency into the assumptions sitting under. I won't walk through examples of these kinds of reports elsewhere, but just know that there's a lot of examples from very complicated and complex to very simple and helpful from other places to look to as the county kind of works to refine these projections. Lastly, this is a smaller one, but an important one. I know when we think about financial policies, when we talked about this earlier, this board has now adopted a much stronger reserve policy for the county. You did that at a meeting earlier this spring, and I think, for reasons we talked about then, that has the potential to put the county in a much better place in the future to navigate multi-year financial cycles. I think this is a companion policy that the board should consider, which is adopting a formal one-time revenue policy. This is the county has done a good job in the last two budget cycles of kind of matching ongoing revenue with ongoing expense, and not using one-time revenue sources to kind of mask structural problems going ahead. But this is a hard practice to sustain over time, given kind of demands for public services and workload. And I would suggest here that the adoption of a one-time revenue policy would provide kind of the structure to sustain that best practice the county's employed over the last two cycles going ahead. And there are examples from many places, many peers to look to for that. So in summary, the recommended summary steps in the roadmap that we have worked on includes adopting revised financial policies, governing reserves, fund balances, and use of one-time revenues to better safeguard county resources, adopt changes to quarterly financial reporting to more clearly summarize key trends, create a multi-year financial forecast that frames each year's annual budget process to give a sense of how the annual budget fits into the longer term of the county's goals, address core financial operational inefficiencies across financial functions by upgrading and re-implementing its financial system, including a careful rebuild of its policies and of its operating procedures. And then lastly, improving revenue collection and reducing resident impacts by clearing the backlog, assessment events of property tax, stabilizing staffing levels in the assessor's office, and building the most important single revenue source for the general fund for the county, it's property tax. So I will stop there. There's a summary here of the findings. I do believe at the end of the day, the recommendations we have worked to put ahead and are now underway in many instances will go a long way towards strengthening the county's financial strength and resiliency, clearing audit findings that have been highlighted in recent state audits. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Supervisor Williams?
I have 3 questions, but first I'd like to express gratitude for all of our staff that worked on this. I think this is the the weakest link in the organization, and you won't have to hear me complain anymore. I've made a lot of noise about this for a lot of years, and I feel like this report and recommendations really exceeds expectations. I appreciate Ben did fine work here, but I know it also took staff in the executive office, information services, auditor, controller, assessor, and probably elsewhere. And the only way we're going to solve this is that sort of collaborative effort because it touches so many people and so many departments. So the 3 questions I have, does the executive office have what's necessary to carry out these recommendations, or will you be needing any sort of approvals from the board? Because this looks like shovel ready. Let's do it.
If I may, through the chair, I think CEO Antle came offline, so I'd...
Yes, if I may really quickly, Supervisor Williams, you know, we're going through our own transition in the executive office, so we are going to need resources. We have this, and you know, I believe in this 100%. So does my team. And again, we've been striving for this. It feels like a long time coming, but we finally got to a roadmap that we can follow. So I really appreciate the support. The team's going to huddle because we are going to need additional resources to make a lot of this happen. And talking through it with Ben at various stages, we're probably going to need somewhere to 3 to 5 additional staff members, not just in the executive office, but in the to support the other offices as well, to move this forward. Again, it's going to take us, you know, quite a while, 3 to 5 years, but I believe the team is fully committed. We want to make it happen, and we will be coming forward asking most likely to hire either full-time or extra help folks to help us carry this out. And I'll let Sarah add additional words if she has some.
If I may, through the chair, I have no additional words, but the executive office does back all of this, and we're, you know, in collaboration with all offices. So,
thank you. Second question, I imagine we're prioritizing, or we should be prioritizing on the tax collection side so that we go after the largest potential gains. I would think we would focus on taxes that are about to become uncollectible, right? Once they cross that threshold, it's too late. But I imagine there's also an element of it may take the same amount of work to collect $1,000 as to collect $100,000. Do we have procedures? Do we have the tooling in place to help us rank the tasks that have the greatest financial gain to the organization?
if I may, through the chair, Assessor Clerk Recorder's Office is not in here right now. I'm assuming that they're all busy with elections. So I don't know through Ben's work if you were able to identify dollar amounts as well.
I can speak briefly to that, to the question. I know the assessor's office, which is busy running an election today, wasn't able to make it today, but we've had many conversations on the exact questions you're getting to, Supervisor Williams. at the moment, for the remainder of the year, I think the priorities for the backlog will change at different times of the year. But you're correct that at this time of the year, the office is focused on clearing those events that we're about to lose as prior year tax events, the ones just before that 4-year. One of the benefits of having the kind of reporting that they have nascent versions of now, which they haven't had in the past, is they can kind of see what's pending and focus in different parts of the pipeline. And they are focused on those just before the 4-year horizon. And we have had talk about the importance of having a value consideration in that effort. It doesn't make sense to chase $1,000 that you're about to lose. The other part of the backlog that they also need to keep in mind, the tension, will be getting this current year's tax events enrolled so that those processes will work more efficiently in the future. So I think they're working at both ends of that 4-year window right now. And I would hope that with the plan coming forward, that you'll have that kind of visibility into what parts of the backlog are they trying to work in each quarter and how far do they expect to get.
Appreciate that. And then last question, and I ask this because inevitably we don't have a PIO, there will be spin out of this discussion. There always is. And a lot of times I read the news and I'm shocked because I was there and that's not quite. Can you, based on your research, can you tell us how you think this problem developed, how far back? And is it fair? My belief is that it's probably nobody with any of the departments today, that these were more institutional legacy decisions that were made piecemeal over a long period of time and some unfortunate, tooling with vendors. And is that, because otherwise I feel like our staff gets unfairly blamed, like somebody failed and we have this problem now, rather than, this has been longstanding for decades.
That's my sense as well, Supervisor. I won't say I've studied this extensively, but it does feel like there has been a perfect storm of events over the past 5 and more years that's kind of driven us to where we are here today, and some of the challenges predate that.
Thanks for your effort.
Yeah, I have one question for you, and it's in reference to page 9, the property assessment backlog. I believe I understand it, but for the benefit of the public, could you go into a little bit more detail about the statute of limitations, the ability to reassess a property but not go back and collect?
Auditor, Controller, Treasurer, Tax Collector, Shamice Cubison. So there is a statute of limitations, but what I need to remind the board and the public is that there's kind of a tension between needing to look at the dollar value and the year, but there's also a bigger issue, and that is that the prior events still have to be worked and recorded in the system because the changes over the years, changes in ownership, changes in boundary line splits, changes in value, that all carries forward. We can't just ignore what happened in the prior years because we can't collect it. It still has to be worked in the system so that when they do get to a year that they can collect on, it's been adjusted by all those previous events. So there's kind of a constant tension between needing to keep current on the ones we can, but then also needing to process the older ones even if we can't collect. And unfortunately, yes, some of those older ones, we can't collect the tax, but we still owe them the refund. So some of that older stuff isn't generating revenue, but it is impacting the bills that we would be generating. So unfortunately, they can't just say, we're just going to look at the biggest dollar value or the years we can still collect or whatever it is in order to ignore some of the older ones that we may not be able to collect on.
Thank you. Supervisor Klein?
Yeah, thank you. I want to agree with Supervisor Williams. This is the biggest opportunity for improvement for the county. We have seen lots of comments online, the news articles, the response from the community around particularly the delinquent tax bills that they're receiving or the escaped assessments they're receiving, and it's really one of the biggest shames that this county has, unfortunately. And I agree, it's a multi-decade problem that's accumulated to this point, and it's going to take us some time to dig out of that. Certainly appreciate the work that Ben and the whole county team have done to bring this presentation forward to us. The board has taken the state audit seriously. We made it a priority at the beginning of the year, and this is, the start of our roadmap, and the next steps are investing the resources, the staff, the money to set the county up for success moving forward. Otherwise, we're never going to level the county up, and we're always going to be playing this game of, being behind financially and not being at the next level where we can instead look at just doing the bare bones essentials, but really what we can do to improve the county as a whole and really level up. So I appreciate the roadmap, the staffing needs, the potential timelines. Obviously, this is very early and preliminary. I think the other thing that's really important is the emphasis on the regular reporting to the board. That needs to be tied to those resources, right? The transparency is necessary to show the public what is happening from those additional investments. So thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Haschak?
Yeah, I want to basically say the same thing, but really, when we talk about, we get criticized a lot for hiring consultants, and I think that in this case, we've had a consultant that's really provided this roadmap that, working with all the staff, but this is really critically important for all these reasons stated. And, what I would like to see is a more defined roadmap moving forward to say, okay, this is what the board needs to be looking at, like the one-time only policy and how we're going to increase the staffing and the funding and all those kind of things to move this along, because it is critically important. One question I did have about, those back taxes that, get split up between different entities. Do we have any liability or responsibility for those taxes not being collected? And how does that work?
Auditor, Controller, Treasurer, Tax Collector Shamise Cubison. The majority of the taxes that you're speaking about will be teetered or have been teetered in terms of, in the future, you're billing versus collecting. That's obviously something different, right? To some extent. I don't see that we have a liability, but maybe there's something I'm not aware of. But these are not all increases. You need to keep that in mind. They are not all increases, and a lot of what we're processing right now are decreases as well. So please do not assume that this is all money that we're not getting, because we are literally issuing refunds in the hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars. So this is not all increases. Yes, some people that you're not hearing from people saying, yay, thank you for giving me a big refund. You're hearing from people saying, we can't pay it, but we are also sending out a lot of money. So you need to keep in mind that this does not represent only increases. And I hate to temper this as part of the discussion in terms of revenue projection, but also keep in mind that part of what we are seeing for the general fund, for the property tax, for the secured tax, some of it does involve processing these groups of backlog. And so right now, there's an assumption that we're going to process a certain amount and that there are going to be increases and that it's going to add about $2 million to this year's 26-27 budget. But that is assuming that there are increases, and that is above what the normal annual secured original charge bill would be. So this is not quite your question, but it's part of your question. So collection, once we bill them, we will be teetering 95% of it to the school districts, and the special districts and the county, whether we've collected it yet or not. But also, this doesn't just represent additional revenue necessarily, because when you look at this time frame, you need to remember that the real estate market is coming down, and some of the rebuilds or the permits are not necessarily all improvements. Some of them are rebuild, probably even still from fire damage. So they're not necessarily all just huge. They could just be coming back online for people who have had to rebuild properties.
Okay, so thank you for that explanation. I guess what I'm looking for is this future roadmap, like the concrete steps that we're going to have to take. And is that something that Mr. Rosenfield with the executive office can bring back to the board in the near future?
If I may, through the chair, the beginning of it is in the appendix where it breaks out the timeline quarter by quarter, but we can continue to refine that with Ben.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, the specifics and bringing those back to the board, I think, is just critically important to move this along.
All right, thank you. Supervisor Moore?
Just while we're on the subject of the particular analysis that we're talking about, I also want to just express appreciation for the independently elected financial representatives that serve our county, and just to reflect on, I am not entering anything in Tyler Munis. I do not have a password for Aumentum. I cannot physically help with any of these functions, but I am happy to help support an increase in staffing, to support an increase in consultants so that we can sort through this, because yes, while certainly we're not hearing from people that are collecting refunds, I do know that it is having a longer lasting impact on our community to be so far behind in the property tax assessments through just not only for people not being prepared to meet those financial obligations to the county, but also our ability to provide services across the board. So it really is important that we now have this roadmap moving forward, and I do appreciate the layout that was in the end of the presentation and all the work that's been done by Mr. Rosenfeld and the executive office, so that we can hopefully be able to move our community forward with the support of the elected officials.
Thank you.
Tony Rakes here for the rest of the 26-27 proposed budget. Okay, so we're going to get ourselves started here with our general fund budget. The highlight here is the general fund budget for fiscal year 26-27 is balanced. We have about $95 million in current general fund net county cost and about 92 in non-departmental revenue. That's ND revenue, that's property tax, sales tax, etc. The difference between those is that 2.59 million, which right now is being covered with one-time funding proposed to balance the budget. Now, importantly, that one-time funding, just like it was the last year, is only for one-time expenditures. We have a slide coming up that will outline every single one of those expenditures that was earmarked for that one-time funding. And that's coming from the fund balance, the 24-25 fund balance, one-time funds. Here we have our revenue projections as we present every year. Our projected revenue for 26-27 is $102 million. The $92.4 million that I had on the prior slide reflects the adjustments in revenue after our operating transfers, so it gets down to what we have available to cover our net county cost. These revenue, the 26-27 projections are based on updated forecasting that the budget team put together. We're going to get into the 5-year forecast at a later slide as well. You can see here that we have shown the actuals from 22-23 to 24-25, what we have budgeted for the current fiscal year, the 25-26, the difference between what's now projected as of Q3 and the updated amounts that we have, and then what we've now proposed as part of our forecast for the upcoming fiscal year. Here we have those one-time expenses that we've earmarked for being covered by fund balance, the one-time funds. I won't read off every single one of these, but we can happy to talk about them. We have anything from short-term contracts that are expected to last less than a year, that have short scope or minimal scope work expected to be done. We have services that the department expects to have needing to be accomplished within a certain period of time. We keep these within a year or a definitive amount of time. We have some equipment that we know that we need to purchase that we can cover with these one-time funds. Projects, one-time projects. We have Within other offices, we have some office expenses that we don't anticipate to continue on through subsequent fiscal year. They're not operational costs. And then anything from extra help, short-term extra help coverage, and equipment repair. That totals that $2.59 million in one-time funding needed to balance the budget. Moving on, we have our general fund ratios. So this is the ratio of general funding to the county departments. This is sorted by the function areas, which is defined on a subsequent slide. As you can see, the lion's share of what we end up with financing for general fund departments is public safety and general government, or public protection and general government. Here we have an update on our general reserves. Now, the board adopted the revision to Policy 32, the general fund reserve, and that updated policy defines 3 reserves: the contingency reserve, the infrastructure and systems reserve, and the rainy day reserve. The balances here on this chart represent the proposed amounts, the proposed appropriations for 26-27. That leaves $7.1 million in our contingency reserve. As a reminder, the contingency reserve covers short-term shocks during the annual budget. It has 5.4 for both the infrastructure and systems reserve and for 5.4 for the rainy day reserve. Infrastructure and systems, as the name implies, it's for handling larger infrastructure projects or large software or systems implementation or reconfiguration efforts that need to be taken care of. And the target amounts and the target appropriations are specified within Policy 32. So now there's this governance structure for how these are handled and then how money is put into these separate reserves at year end. Here we have our 5-year budget forecast. This does include, again, the one-time funds that we have that we're proposing to use to balance the 26-27 budget. So we have at 26-27, you'll see the 2 lines, the red representing expense and blue representing the revenue, meeting for both 25-26 and 26-27, representing those balanced budgets. And then moving forward based on the projections where we anticipate the delta to be, or the gap between our revenue and expenditures for the general fund. And I know we've talked about this forecast before. It's been refined since prior budget reports, but I want to call out in fiscal year 2030-31, you'll see a jump there in that revenue. That represents expenses falling off from certificates of participation, COP costs, that will reflect in the budget as additional revenue, but it's expense going down. So that helps bump that fiscal year up some. We have some significant upcoming impacts that we want to call out for this board's awareness. I'm sure many of you already know, but this specifically is that the Executive Office budget team is going to continue to monitor this and communicate back what we learn promptly. Federal legislation, we've talked about HR1 quite a lot over the past year and the upcoming impacts. Additional county CMSP, county medical service costs that we have budgeted some in 26-27, but we anticipate, it's hard to anticipate the full impact of that, especially considering the current state landscape and upcoming changes that are happening, which is the next bullet for the state budget uncertainty. There's the conversation, ongoing conversation regarding the proposed annexation from the city of Ukiah and potential impacts there. And the international landscape, changing procurement methods, costs. For example, we have some industries where we purchase from that no longer honor long-term quotes. For example, budgetary quotes that last 30 days are now 10. Requiring much faster turnaround time, and because of the uncertainty in the international market. Here we have some budget highlights for the state. We have HR1 here, and what we've put together here are what we believe the county impacts will be based on these. As we know with HR1, the federal legislation there, the additional requirements for Medi-Cal eligibility, we know we expect that to impact our caseload here at the county and the programs and the increased demand on that care that the county has to provide for. For in-home support services, there's the proposed asset test being re-implemented that may impact the number of people being able to participate in that program. That's going to impact, that will probably have an impact on county service, on the county support required to carry those out. And of course, a wider county implication as well. And I believe CEO Antle has her hand up, so I'll pause quickly before I move on.
Thank you, Tony. On this slide, I also wanted to share, yesterday I was on a statewide call with regarding the Affordable Care Act. And they are looking at about approximately 660,000 people in the state of California falling off that plan. They either won't be able to afford it because there will be no subsidies for that plan. Those folks will either fall to Medi-Cal in some cases or to the indigent program CMSP. And again, CMSP does require a general fund match. At this point, there is some funding proposed in the Assembly's budget. But again, between the Assembly and the Senate, they have a long way to go to mirror those two so we can get to that budget guidelines for the next year. So it's very worrisome, all these changes that are happening at once and how that indigent care is going to come down to us. Because again, the county is responsible for the Welfare and Institution Code, 17,000. Thank you, Tony.
Moving on, the last item that we have here, there is a proposal with the state budget to apply the state sales tax to digital software sales. So the state's anticipating that going into effect on January 1st, 2027. They have a projected state revenue for 26-27 of about $500 million and a full year revenue of about $1 billion. How that impacts our county in terms of additional Bradley Burns sales tax revenue, we don't know yet, but that will be something we're going to be keeping an eye on moving forward. There might be additional county revenue and sales tax coming in as a result of that. This is our obligatory functional area slide. And then into our recommendations. We have a few of these, and I will read them out for us. Approve adjustments detailed in the CEO recommended budget adjustments to departments submitted as outlined in Attachment B, General Fund, and Attachment C, Non-General Fund. Approve the fiscal year 2026 department funding requests in Attachment A, directing the Auditor Controller to return to the Board of Supervisors on June 23rd, 2026 with a formal resolution adopting the fiscal year 26-27 Mendocino County budget based on the above direction. Approve amendments to the position allocation table as listed in Attachment D, directing Human Resources to return to the Board of Supervisors on June 23rd, 2026 with an updated position allocation table. Approve funded fixed assets and vehicles, structural improvements, and projects as listed in Attachment F. Approve the fiscal year 2026-27 Enterprise Internal Service Fund department allocations listed in Attachment H. Approve fiscal year 26-27 Microwave Public Safety Radio Communications department allocations listed in Attachment E. Approve the transfer of any unused fiscal year 25-26 carry forward to reserves per the reserve and fund balance policy, the updated policy 32. Approve appropriation of $2,585,536 in fiscal year 24-25 carry forward funding for fiscal year 26-27 budget. And finally, accept the fiscal year 26-27 proposed budget report. And with that, the team is open for questions, comments, and discussion.
Supervisor Haschak? Yes, I'm sorry. Ms.
Sorry, if
Pierce?
I may through the chair, I just wanted to just close real quickly on some of this. On the upcoming impacts that was just presented, we just want to make clear that those impacts are not factored into this budget. There are a few things like CMSP that we've put about $500,000 in, but the other stuff such as federal legislation, state budgetary uncertainty, the proposed annexation, the economic landscape, and what was left off of this slide is we also have some unknowns about retirement in the future, which could impact us again. So those are not factored into the budget, but we are closely watching them. And I can turn it back over for questions now.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Haschak, you have a question?
Yeah, going back to page 6, where we have the public protection being 68.46, and it seems like in the past years it's been more like 76%. So what accounts for that change?
If I may, through the chair, Tony Rakes, that change represents, from what we've seen, is the massive effort that's gone into trying to controlling those public safety budgets and relying on other non-departmental revenue streams, or departmental revenue streams to cover costs. So it's really due to the departments and the offices putting in the effort putting additional heavy effort into the budget to try to control costs. And so that's going to change that ratio of that general fund, that non-departmental general fund that gets appropriated for those departments.
Okay. And what I see, I see this balanced budget, which is great. But in addition to those unknowns that we have, we also have negotiations, and then we also have what Ben Rosenfield just outlined, those costs for the financial modernization. So it seems like we've got a couple areas that aren't reflected in this budget, along with those others that we just talked about too.
If I may, through the chair, yes, they once again, they are not reflected in the budget. We are keeping a close eye on them. As we learn more, we'll bring them back in front of the board and potentially identify additional revenue that may be able to offset it, potentially one-time funds. So we are closely watching all of the unknowns right now.
Okay,
and we do believe that what Ben presented will be a significant task to implement, but we do believe it's very important that we continue on that path. It's the only way we can ensure that we are sustainable in our future.
If I may, through the chair, it's also the benefit that this updated reserve policy has provided is that there's money now being set aside for infrastructure and systems projects, should the board wish to approve the use of those funds for those projects.
Thank you. Supervisor Williams?
I had asked the executive office about what used to be called the ALS Assist, the funding of the 3 ambulance providers by the county. And just for the record, she pointed me at page 113 of attachment J, and it's actually grouped together under payments to other government agencies. It's part of the 1.1 million. I'm raising it because a lot of years there's concern that we left it out. It's in there. It's just a line item that's not detailed in the budget. And then I noticed the interest for fire, because it took us a few years to get the contracts done and pay fire their tax revenue. I think we accumulated a lot of interest. I imagine that'll be paid out because it should have been in their account and they would have received the interest. Instead, it was in ours for an extended period of time. Is that a fair assumption?
If I may, through the chair, I'm going to have to defer to Shamise on that question. I'm not sure I'm fully understanding.
The question is because we didn't pay, we spent a lot of time holding on to money that was going to fire districts. We accumulated interest rather than the districts accumulating interest. Will we make them whole at some point and do those transfers?
I'm going to have to defer to Shamise.
Auditor, Controller, Treasurer, Tax Collector Shamise Cubison, as you are approving the allocations, we are transferring the money into the Fire Services Fund. That fund is generating interest. So at some point, the board can decide how it's going to allocate that interest. That interest includes the money that ended up with the fire chiefs,
Yep.
but not, because every allocation is technically possibly different.
Right. Okay, I appreciate that. That works. And then last, I also had Supervisor Haschak's concern that I think there are likely cost escalations. Some of our largest categories are not static. They're going to be increasing in year over year. And so it's a balanced budget, but it's a balanced budget because we're not including some likely expenditures.
Any other questions from the board? No? Okay. We can go to the public. Anybody in the room?
Good morning, Chair Norvell, members of the board, CEO Antle, County Council Elliott. My name is Patrick Hickey. I'm the field representative with SEIU Local 1021. What we just heard from Ben Rosenfeld is, I think, a microcosm of the problem faced by most departments here at the county. As you continue your work here on the county budget for 2026-2027, there are a few things that we urge you to consider to help stabilize county services and move county government in a more positive direction. County services touch nearly every aspect of daily life here in Mendocino County, from the Department of Transportation to planning and building, air quality, environmental health, public health, behavioral health, and more. County employees work every day to keep our community safe, our infrastructure functioning, and our social safety net strong. But these services are increasingly at risk. Many departments are understaffed, turnover remains high, employees are carrying overwhelming caseloads and responsibilities. This is not sustainable, and it does not have to be this way. Mendocino County government functions best when it can retain experienced employees and attract new workers with fair wages, strong benefits, and stable working conditions. Investing in county employees is an investment in the quality, reliability, and responsiveness of the services our communities depend on every day. We are dubious of the claims of a structural deficit. It's more of an issue of collecting the funds that the county is due. General fund revenue has grown faster than general fund expenses over the past 5 years. The fund balance has grown from $29.5 million to $80.5 million over the past 7 years. Every year, the actual fund balance exceeded the county's final budgeted balance. The county has underspent its operating budget in every single year for 7 consecutive years by an average of $27.6 million. This is why we see a regular carry forward of $10 million plus each year. The county has acknowledged that there are roughly $30 million in uncollected property tax revenue and has recently decided to give up collecting delinquent cannabis tax revenue. It's not a revenue problem, it's a collection problem. The county is choosing to leave $30 million on the table while citing budget constraints as the reason it cannot fund services. The county has shrunk its staff level by 155 positions since 2021. Our unit has seen a 19% reduction. The county's budget assumes filling all allocated positions, but we all know that that won't happen. There is a built-in 15 to 20% cushion in the budget. For years, the county has had double-digit vacancy rates, as there is at this moment, 15.5%. So to suggest that there is no funding available to support current staff is false. We heard earlier about the common practice of other counties providing a placeholder for county COLAs. We urge the board to do the same. Why is that a problem? Because by pretending there's a structural deficit, the county is strangling its current services, driving experienced employees out the door and setting itself up for systemic failure. We urge the board to stabilize and support its current staff, retain the experience and wisdom that it already has, and give your current employees a reason to stay and signal to them that they are valued and recognized. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Norvell, members of the board, Matt Kendall, Sheriff. During the presentation, Mr. Rakes brought up the annexation again. I'd like to know how much that's going to cost us. During the last discussion that we had on this, Supervisor Mulheron basically stated it would cost us about $150,000 in the first year. That's a deputy sheriff that we'll lose in the first year. What's it going to look like in the second year? What will it look like in the third year? I think that we need to take a good hard look at this and make a decision. Can we make this net zero? And if we can't make this net zero, then let's not continue down that road. Damaging the county is not going to be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room? No. Madam Clerk, anyone online?
Seeing no further comment online.
Thank you. Staff, do you have anything further to add?
No further comments.
Okay. Any more questions from the board? Ms. Cubison, I have one. The 30 million gets brought up quite a bit in this room and then in public. Could you shed a little bit of light on that for us?
Sure, thank you. Auditor Controller Treasurer Tax Collector Shamise Cubison. The $30 million is the defaulted property tax that is outstanding. That number fluctuates greatly throughout the year. It's highest at the beginning of July because that's when the tax bills roll to defaulted, and then it's continued to be collected throughout the year, and it goes down probably again lowest in the end of June and highest in July. That represents the uncollected property tax. That does not represent additional revenue to the county, the special districts, or the schools. It represents the reduction of accounts receivable. Those funds have been primarily, with the exception of those for Brook Trails lots that are not teetered, have already been paid out to the schools, the cities, and the special districts and the county. The impact is to the teeter fund, and when the teeter fund tax loss reserve is higher than 25% and there's excess revenue, that can be transferred to the general fund. But that is the only benefit of revenue that would be seen from collecting the entire amount of that $30 million would be the additional amount that may be sitting in a tax loss reserve account that may be able to be transferred. But that $30 million has already been distributed because the county does teeter the majority. It does not teeter the PACE payments, and it does not teeter some of the Brook Trails direct assessments. But otherwise, those funds have already been received.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions before we close the public hearing? No? Okay. You have a question? No. It's 11:44. We'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the board. Supervisor Mulhern.
Thank you. Over the last 6 years, one of the things I've struggled with most is how we talk about the budget and our financial outlook. Some call it the sky is falling or doomsday planning. I want to be clear that I absolutely believe that we need to be fiscally responsible. We also have an obligation to taxpayers, employees, and future boards to understand the financial impacts of our decisions. Fiscal responsibility requires transparency and context. What concerns me is that budget information can be presented in a way that may be technically accurate but does not tell the complete story. Recently, the CEO report included an analysis of the future City of Ukiah annexation focused heavily on the loss of county revenue and not the release of obligations, including roads that were not included in the 20-year road maintenance plan, as well as the roads that were in the plan outlined to be an estimated savings of $12 million by our Department of Transportation. That same can be said of the no savings evaluation of the Sheriff's Office. While that analysis may be technically true, I do not believe that there will be reducing of the Sheriff's Office staffing after a potential annexation. This does not equally acknowledge that annexation also transfers service obligations for areas with very heavy call volumes from the Sheriff's Office to the Ukiah Police Department, which will allow the Sheriff's Office to meet other community needs in outlying areas. It also didn't address the increased costs to our expenses by the potential of having our own tax, the increased revenue of 2011 to 91 realignment, and frankly, none of this accurately addresses the infrastructure responsibilities, maintenance costs, and long-term liabilities, including those related to water rights and resources and sewer services that the county will be able to move away from and turn over to the City of Ukiah, or that the county doesn't currently serve, but may be obligated to in the future. For me, this is just one recent example, but as with everything that happens with local government, when we present only one side of the story, we risk creating a narrative rather than providing an analysis. That approach has consequences. It erodes trust with the public. It creates frustration among staff who may see the full picture but do not feel empowered to share it or to solve the problems that affect our residents. It makes it harder for elected officials to have honest conversation about policy choices. And I've spent the last 6 years trying to improve transparency and change the culture around how information is shared. I've advocated for more context, more collaboration, and more open discussion. I thought we were making headway with that in this budget. I continue to see situations where information is filtered through a lens that supports a particular conclusion. And I keep asking myself what can be done differently. The only answer I keep coming back to is that we must be willing to share more information directly with the public. Not selected facts, not talking points, not narratives, the full picture. The public and our employees are capable of understanding complexity. They can weigh competing interests. They can understand that a decision may involve both costs and benefits. Our responsibility is not to persuade them to a predetermined outcome. Our responsibility is to provide complete and honest information so they can draw their own conclusions. That's how trust is built. And right now, trust is something we need more in local government, not less. This county has over and over again failed to share a united voice across the agency as elected officials, the executive office, and what is being said by the departments to create a message that is digestible to the public around complicated and nuanced decisions that the board makes. This harms the agency, our employees, our communities, employers, and our residents. So I appreciate the way that the budget has moved forward and evolved, but we have more work to do.
Supervisor Williams.
Clarifying question for Supervisor Mulhern. What additional information do you think we should provide? And I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just curious if what's not included for public benefit that you think would help broaden everyone's knowledge.
I think that some of the things that Mr. Rosenfeld included in his report, including the future income opportunities, including what future property tax revenues look like. I think, future forecasting is really important, but also, just in addition to including the expenses, I think that, like I said, we've come a long way in the last few years or 18 months, but there's more work to do. And I don't want to sit here and not say anything out loud when there's clear challenges that we still need to work through.
Supervisor Klein.
Yeah, Supervisor Mulhern, as someone who's on the annexation ad hoc, I want to make sure that all the information is being brought forward. And I think the CEO's report was more focused on the general fund side of things. Can you just repeat again what items you would like to see included in the analysis for the financial impact for annexation? Because I'm happy to make sure that those are addressed and updated moving forward. I heard you mention a couple, if you could repeat them.
Sure. The ones that I mentioned in particular were the sheriff's office call volume related to the annexation. And again, absolutely do not think that any deputy sheriffs are going to be laid off or that we won't hire more. I don't think that that's going to happen. But I do think that there should be an analysis done about the reduction in calls and the shift to the sheriff being able to provide more rural policing. And honestly, that was part of the master sales tax agreement. We had 22 months of conversations around, this is a balanced agreement. This is not only a loss in revenue to the county, but it's a loss in the obligations and liabilities. So I don't have a full list prepared today. I did also reach out to the Department of Transportation because I was surprised to see that the CEO's office said that there would be no reduction in roads funds. And while I understand that it's likely that the funds would be used elsewhere, I think it's disingenuous the way that it was presented. And I do not have prepared a list today of everything that I think should be included. That was, again, over 22 months of conversations about the master sales tax sharing agreement and how it balanced the potential annexation area. So happy to share that information even with the full board, because I don't know that we have an ad hoc. I don't think it's listed on the website as an ad hoc. The chair can create one at any time.
It is.
Okay, well, I didn't know when that was created, but I'm happy to share sort of, I guess, my list. I clearly presented that multiple times during the sales tax agreement conversation, including the June 5th, 2024 meeting, but happy to, make sure that all of the information is getting out to the public. And just to be clear, I spend some time to meet with the CEO, to meet with the city of Ukiah. I reached out to the sheriff. I reached out to the Department of Transportation before preparing my statement today. And my concerns are not just around the annexation. It's around everything that we talk about as the county when we talk about our budget and the impacts that it has in our community, to the other businesses, to the residents. When the county of Mendocino, the agency, is not a strong, reliable agency, that harms. It has a ripple effect to other districts, to other cities, to the entire community, to the businesses that create economic development for us.
Any other questions? No? Supervisor Williams?
Yeah, trying to stay within scope of the agenda item. I think the annexation probably deserves its own agenda item at some point. Should we be allocating any funds for an independent analysis? It's my sense that whether the city does it or the county does it, Supervisor Mulhern, Sheriff Kendall, not everybody will believe it. There's an assumption that there's some bias, and it's probably just different perspectives, and it may all be true information, but presented towards a certain outcome. Should we be hiring an outside firm? We had great success with creating the roadmap for fixing the financial system. Do we need something similar for clearly documenting what impact the annexation will have on the county and the city? My position is I want the city and county to do well. I think there's an annexation plan that's a win-win. The city can develop more. The county will benefit from that. I don't know if it's the particular plan. I mean, it worries me the sheriff sees a major hole in service where we are already understaffed and we already have too many calls for service. And, is he right? My fear is that he might be. He may know something that I don't know. And I think Supervisor Mulhern probably has points that I also don't know. I would love to see it come together in an independent, unbiased report that just conveys the truth. Is that something we could budget with one-time funds in the budget? That's how I'm tying it into this agenda item.
If I may, through the chair, we can take note of it. I don't know that we can bring it back on June 23rd to include in the budget, but it could be an allowable use for one-time funds.
Yeah, and I just want to point out that part of the issue is the annexation in the map is it's a moving target, right? I mean, we were presented in our first ad hoc with that meeting. We were asked very explicitly not to screenshot the map, not to share the map, not to share the information, and then an hour later the map was presented to the public. I did ask the city of Ukiah over the weekend if they had a timeline for a final map, and their answer was not to consider any draft map as a final map, and they presented no timeline. We do have a request in for them to have a meeting early next week where we can weigh their interest in any kind of negotiating. I know Supervisor Williams brought it up the last meeting, and it seemed like we had board consensus that we wanted to at least get to a net zero. But we'll see what happens in that meeting. But we have to remember that the city of Ukiah doesn't have to negotiate because with the way that the tax sharing agreement is written, that the county basically has no leverage to force them into a negotiation. Supervisor Haschak.
Yeah, my understanding is that we weren't going to do a financial analysis for any kind of annexation plan that's not really the concrete plan that's presented to the board. And so I thought we were waiting for that. And at the same time, with this analysis, I think it should be a neutral analysis, and meaning that the county shouldn't have to bear the whole brunt of that cost. It should be a shared cost of the, in this case, the city of Ukiah and the county to come up with an analysis that both sides agree on.
Yeah, Supervisor Hashtag, to that point, previous annexation proposal, when we met and discussed with the city of Ukiah, they did offer to support some of the outside consultant work around financial analysis. CEO, if you could confirm that they did offer that last year, and so I'm happy to bring that up at our upcoming meeting.
Yes, that was an offer last year, and honestly, we had been asked for the impacts of what it was going to look like to the county of Mendocino, and really working through this analysis that Assistant CEO Sarah Pierce created. It is in line with what we saw working with the city. So if there's other information out there that the city has and they're willing to share it, whether it's economic development, you know, how they see that the road fund would be saving funds. Those funds aren't even collected yet. And we do know that revenue for roads is based on miles and population, not only the population, our population ratio to the state, but also our population as a county to the cities. So we don't know exactly what will happen with that revenue. I think we put that in our report. We're not trying to scare anyone. We're not trying to minimize it, but we want to be as transparent as possible. These are unknowns that we don't know. And again, if the city or Supervisor Mulheron knows of something, I believe we asked about economic development. I don't believe the city has spoken forward with any economic development that they're seeing coming in the first few years of this. So again, the more information we have, the more accurate we can be. And again, outside independent analysis would be very much appreciated. I'll turn it over to Sarah Pierce.
If I may, through the chair, Assistant CEO Sarah Pierce. As CEO Antle mentioned, I did create this analysis, and it was based off just the master tax sharing agreement revenues that were called out, specifically about Bradley Burns property tax, TOT. The property tax is extremely hard to calculate because it's going to be in a manual process. The initial analysis only looked at Bradley Burns and TOT. And as CEO Antle said, the documents that the city did provide to us are very, very close to our analysis, but we would welcome an independent consultant to vet on both sides. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. I'm not seeing any more questions. Yes, Supervisor Haschak.
Do we have a motion on the table?
We do not.
Okay, I'll move to approve the fiscal year 26-27 Mendocino County proposed budget as recommended, accept the Executive Office budget report, and direct the Auditor Controller to prepare the required documents for adoption of the fiscal year 26-27 final budget.
Second.
Okay, we have a first by Supervisor Haschak, second by Williams. Any questions on the motion? Vote by the button.